baby boomers.
I used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacey and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program, the old geezers in Congress. If you're under the age of 35, Dr. Stacey's about to come down on you hard.
The burden of a democracy is on you, right? If you want an easy government, go live in Russia.
And now, here are James and Emily. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at news, events, things around the world from a generational lens. I am James Davenport, Professor of Political Science and Associate Dean of Social Sciences at Rose State College. Along with me is my wonderful, fantastic colleague, Dr. Emily Stacey, also a Professor of Political Science at Rose State College. How are you doing this morning?
Fantastic. Very excited about this cool new space, man.
Isn't this awesome?
You did a good job. I'm impressed.
We found a nice place here at Possibilities, Inc. to now host our podcast, and we are super excited about that.
Yeah, this is very cool. So we'll start doing more regular episodes for you folks again.
That's right.
I know we had some regular listeners, viewers, I guess, when you were watching us on YouTube. Sorry, you don't get to see us anymore. Maybe we'll bring in one of the younger Davenports to take photos for us.
We could do that sometime. Yeah,
document this a little bit.
Absolutely.
We'll be more regular now. So get used to us.
That's right. We are back.
Yes.
With a vengeance or something like that.
Yeah, very much so. And we're excited because obviously it's campaign season. It's been campaign season, I guess, really since 2020.
Exactly. Well, it's definitely been campaign season at the presidential level. We're about to get into real campaign season for these other offices as well. And come January, it's just going to be insane. So,
yeah. I'm already tired. How are you feeling?
I'm energized. I'm good to go.
No voter fatigue yet? No?
Well, we had our Constitution extravaganza. Yes. That just wiped me out by the end of that week. But I think I'm a little rejuvenated. I'm excited about our topic today. We're going to be talking about the old geezers in Congress and what we can or should do about it, if there's anything we can or should do about it. So that is a topic. If you haven't been paying attention, you have missed out on some really interesting things. We've had the minority leader in the Senate freeze up in 3 or 4 press conferences
Very
now,
public.
just staff having to walk him off the stage. Yeah. Dianne Feinstein has been playing Weekend at Bernie's, right? The last year or so. President Biden has seemed to have had some difficulties. And before anybody goes, that's why we need to vote for Trump. Trump is only a few years younger than Biden, right?
Just turned 77. He just turned this year. So Biden 80, Trump only 77. So the argument is a little moot at this point.
At this point, we're talking about old folks, right? And why? Why is that the case? Why are these people who in any other profession would be looking at retirement, would be enjoying their time with grandkids or traveling or whatever, and instead they are holding on to power with the tips of their finger, right? They're clawing onto that power.
It's really incredible to see. And this is not anything new, unfortunately, right? We have watched several congressmen literally die in the Congress, right? So Strom Thurmond, age 100, died while still being wheeled around in the Senate in 2003. Byrd, again in 2010, 92 years old. Ted Kennedy, again, right? It just is. It's something in American politics that we really need to discuss. And I think a lot of it, we can lament and shake our fist at the sky about voter turnout and the youth, which I'm about to very, very soon.
If you're under the age of 35, Dr. Stacey's about to come down on you hard. Just a warning.
You children. I need you to vote. We're going to have a conversation today. But yeah, it's been really difficult, I think, to watch and to remind our listeners, you are of the Gen X, right?
I am. That's right.
And I am our resident elder millennial. I don't like the term that is going around social media where the children are referring to us as geriatric millennials.
Oh my goodness.
She's not a fan of that.
That's awful.
It's offensive. I am offended, sir.
Well, that's okay. Gen Xers, the older of Gen Xers, I'm kind of right on the middle, the upper middle. But the older Gen Xers often get called boomers, and we have a little reaction to that as well.
Yeah, so. Well, you maybe don't sound like them so much
Hey
often.
now.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting. We'll get into the numbers. I want to note, however, right, because you are of the Gen X persuasion, you guys have failed so far to put up a viable presidential candidate.
What is with that? What that is?
It's very interesting.
We've abandoned politics.
Is that what it is?
I think Gen X is like, look, number one, everybody ignores us. Everybody's talking about the fight between the millennials and the boomers, right? Yep. And we're just we're the smallest of those generations. Yes. We're packed in between two much very larger. And our attitude has always been, there's lots of research on this, on the differences between generations. We've always been a little bit more independently minded than the other ones. We've also been kind of we're derided or sometimes celebrated, depending on who you're talking to, as the I don't care generation, right? It doesn't matter. We're just going to do our thing, and whatever happens, happens. And I think some of that is reflected in that. Some of that is there's not the numbers of us to compete with these other two generations as well.
I don't know.
So
the Congress is full of you.
There's a little bit of us, right? It depends. There's not a lot of us Gen Xers compared to boomers, especially. But let's talk about Congress for a second. So we talked about this just a little bit yesterday in our town hall, but the median age of the U.S., of everybody in the country, is 38.1 years, right? The median age of the House is 57.9, so almost 20 years older, right? The median age of the Senate is 65.3, right?
Good Lord.
You're talking about people who are up there, right? If you look at just the House, 43% of the members of the House are 60 or older. Wow. Okay. 72 of those members are over 70. If you look at the Senate, a fully 67% are over the age of 60.
My goodness.
Right. At 30, in fact, you've got more members that are 70 or older than you have that are 60 or older. Wow. And so this is where we're at. And these are the folks driving this train, and they've been driving it for quite a while.
Yes. Literally.
And so when you look at things like the budget deficit, when you look at things like climate change issues, when you look at things like economic issues, these types of things, and you're wondering, why isn't much changing? Well, the same people have been running the show for quite a
40,
while.
50 plus years.
Right. And so what's the incentive for them to change?
Absolutely.
And we keep voting them back in.
Oh, to the tune of 90-something, some odd percent in both entities.
Now, if you look at the freshmen who are elected to the House, or let's look at those folks for a second, their ages are lower, right? So the median Republican freshman had an age of 47.2. The median Democrat was actually slightly higher at 44.1.
I'm just a little surprised by that.
Right. The youngest Republican was 33. The youngest Democrat, 26. I think that was Representative Frost, right? The median incumbent of the Republicans in the House is 59. So considerably older, right? Median incumbent of the Democrats, 61.
Thanks, Pelosi.
Well, and speaking of, the oldest Republican in the House is 85.
Oh, my goodness.
The oldest Democrat is 86. So this is where we're at. This is who's running the show. If you look at the break between boomers and the silent generation and Gen X and millennials and below, they're almost even in the House as far as numbers, right? But the people with power are in those older generations.
Yeah, right. Yeah, incredibly older. Especially, I mean, obviously, you and I are professors, and so our students are, I mean, most often going to be from that Gen Z generation. Of course, we're at a community college, so we have a diverse population. So we get returning students, military, et cetera. But a vast majority are
freshmen are by and large.
And then we also have a very large population of concurrent students, so younger than the age of 18. So we
can't even vote.
Yes, exactly.
And I had a question. I was talking, when we talked about first week or two of the semester, covering like the Declaration of Independence and things like that, and talking about the American Revolution, we talked about, one of the big sayings at the time was no taxation without representation, right? Yes. And then I asked all of these 16 and 17-year-olds how many of them had jobs, part-time jobs, and how many of them paid taxes, who had taxes taken out. Yeah. And then how many of them could vote? Right. And I'm like, where's that no taxation without representation for you guys?
Exactly.
Right? Now, if you talk to older Gen X Davenport, he's like, I'm not sure I want 16 and 17-year-olds voting. Right. But if we're going to say, and we're going to hold that up as the standard, those folks have an argument, I think.
They do. Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And, when we talk about, Social Security that they're paying into, all of the programs that they're paying into, and whether or not they are going to exist when they get there.
And this is the thing I think a lot of these younger folks don't understand about Social Security is
I hit the button.
They're not paying into some savings account or investment account that's going to be there for them, right? Yeah. They're paying their taxes for current benefits for current retirees, right? And the promise of the government is we'll do that for you when you come along, right? But guess what? We've got a shrinking workforce and a growing aging population. Right. Something's got to change.
Multiple recessions and, a pandemic.
Right. And so where's all that money?
Yeah, exactly.
And we've known for a long time. I remember working for a member of Congress in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Social Security was already saying, look, by 2035, we're not going to be taking in enough in taxes to pay the obligated benefits, right? Nobody's fixed that. Nope. And it's just getting worse. Yep. And so... And my point is you have a lot of younger people who don't have a lot of income, don't have a lot of resources, and they're paying into Social Security to fund, by and large, wealthier retired folks who are sipping Mai Tais on the beach. All right. I know that's not everybody. I'm not, but you get my point, right? There's a significant portion of them. And if you look at wealth accumulation by age, it is heavily skewed towards older. And that's a life progression thing. That's not there's not some conspiracy to make that happen. But the fact is, the older you are, you tend to be more wealthy.
Right, and well established.
So we have a program that is based on taking money from largely poor populations and funding largely more wealthy populations.
Yes.
Hey, if you don't like that, vote. Right?
Yes.
Right? Now we can get back to vote.
Yes, exactly. So your figures are terrifying. The average ages of Congress, absolutely terrifying. And when we talk about the population, just generally speaking, Brookings pulled some data together from the Census Bureau. So millennials in plurals, they're calling the Gen Z folks the plural generation.
Is that short for like pluralistic? Is it like they're just more diverse?
Just more diverse, yeah. Okay. So we will actually be a majority of potential voters by 2028 and over 60% of the electorate by 2036. Yeah. So this is a problem, right? We're railing, right? I hit the James Davenport Social Security button. Sorry about it, listeners. So we're railing about these things and talking about them in a real way. And a majority of the population now, almost, of the voting population, I should say, may not see those policies come to fruition, right? I am a millennial and I don't have any. I'm not holding my breath at all. Thank you, Rose State College, for funding my retirement, honestly, because I'm not holding my breath on Social Security whatsoever.
It is... It's problematic, and it's not like there haven't been proposals out there for that. And that's just one issue, right? There are other issues that are out there. You find younger generations are more concerned about climate change. They're more concerned about some different economic issues. So now what's interesting is how will those perspectives shift? Will they shift as your millennials, Gen Z, as they mature? Will those perspectives change at all, or will they stay noticeably different?
So I'm glad you brought that up. So the New York Times did a really awesome, just quick analysis in June of 2023, where they noted that the millennial generation is not an outlier. They too are moving towards the right. And so I very, very much pointedly circled, of course, my little segment of the world. I was born in 1984. And so from 2000...
Oh my gosh. Such a baby.
Good Lord. I'll be 40 soon. So from 2012 to 2020, we moved from roughly 38% over to almost 50% to the right. Like, it's terrifying. So voters who were 18 to 29 in 2008 backed Joe Biden by 55% to 43%, half the margin of Obama's 12 years earlier. So again, we are starting to see, again, those elder, not geriatric, millennials, we're not immune. And so they go on, Nate Cohen writes this article, and it's largely because the shift to the right for the older millennials is actually because of the shift in the issues, right? The issue base has changed, right? So the things that were really important to me as an elder millennial, like gay marriage, for example, that was a driving issue for Democrats back in the early to mid 2000s. That brought people in, the war in Iraq, for example. Those things have largely gone by the wayside or been resolved by the Supreme Court or policy, et cetera. And so you don't really have that same drive in the older millennial population towards the Democrats as you do for the younger ones. The younger ones are still very mired in the politics of gun control and abortion specifically right now, and climate change, right? That's a huge issue for the plurals or for Gen X. And so as long as those issues remain tangible, it would seem that the younger of the millennial generation and then Gen Z are likely going to be a problem for the Republicans in the future. Right. So,
and that has been one of the things that the Republicans have had to deal with is that their base is an aging base, right? And while millennials may be moving slightly more conservative, it's probably not going to make up for when the boomer generation and even the Gen X, which tends to be more conservative than the ones after it, when those start passing on, you're not going to see as much of a shift to the right to make up for those, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. The generations now stretch from 18 to 41, the millennial generation. And so, again, that's a huge chunk of the population specifically. It's a bigger portion of the population than it was in 2016, 2020. And so this is going to be a much bigger problem for both parties specifically, but more so, I think, in terms of finding issues that are really attractive to those younger voters for the Republicans.
But this is my question. Yeah. You look at the presidential election this year, right? Two white guys over the age of 75 running for president. Yes. If I'm 25, what do these people have in common with me? Are they talking about issues that I'm concerned about? And why am I stuck with this choice? Yeah. Why is this where I'm at? Is that because I don't know anybody who believes, regardless of your partisanship, regardless of what you think about Republicans and Democrats, I don't think there's a person in this world that thinks Joe Biden and Donald Trump are the two best, most qualified people to lead the premier country on the face of the earth.
Yeah. So another NPR report. I love this. So they did a survey of roughly about 1,600 adults, 18 to 34, and found that young people are optimistic about the future or their personal futures and about being more successful within their parents, which is interesting because I don't think the economics actually support that. We can get on a fight about that in a later podcast. But nearly a quarter of young people remain politically undecided between Biden and Trump, between an incumbent and a potential unnamed Republican nominee. So nearly 2/3 of them, again, are more optimistic about getting a good education, et cetera, but are not optimistic about the future of their government and about it being representative. They expect it to be less representative than their parents, which is
that's
terrifying,
pretty interesting, right?
Right? To have that kind of dichotomy where I personally feel good, right? Typically, you need to have a functioning government or a government that at least gives off some sort of air of legitimacy, right? And that they're making policies that are in the best interest of the people, and quite particularly economic policies. So very interesting. 3 out of 5 of young people surveyed say that financial insecurity is a factor that is limiting their futures, even though they feel optimistic about it. When asked to pick issues, which is where we were going next, nearly a quarter of young Americans say that healthcare is top of mind problem for the Republicans, followed by the economy. Again, if we're looking at Maganomics versus Bidenomics, just the numbers, that may be something that is troublesome for the Republicans as well. But definitely housing affordability, both at 24%, young folks say are important to them. And then the 3 after that are reproductive rights at 23%, for sure a problem for at least the older vanguard of Republicans, as we have seen them on the debate stage right now, if we're talking just presidential politics. Climate change, again, definitely a problem. And then gun violence, something that not a lot of the conservatives have really moved on in recent years. So again, I think that, the youth right now are set up in a way, at least part of the youth is set up in a way that is going to be difficult to kind of pull over, which is why you see organizations like Turning Point, who was just on our campus a couple of weeks ago, trying to come out and really spread that conservative message. Very interesting stuff.
So here becomes the question, right? We've laid out all of this. Mm-hmm. You've got people in your government, in Congress especially, who are much more aged than the people they're representing. Yeah. Are there any solutions to this?
Yeah, vote.
That's your only solution.
Recruit candidates and vote. Yeah, recruit candidates. I mean, it starts at the very, very base level of grassroots politics. All politics is local. If you can't go out, if you don't have a neighbor, a friend, a pastor, a professor, somebody who is you believe is worthy of running and can make good policy for your neighborhood, then consider yourself. I think that's where the conversation needs to start. Why are our state parties, right? Why are your state parties not doing a better job of recruiting candidates? And again, if we think that all politics is local and should come from the grassroots level, then that enthusiasm for both political parties, I guess 3 technically, if we're talking libertarian in Oklahoma. It should bubble up, right? It should bubble up, that enthusiasm from the ground up to the national politics, right? Not top down, in my opinion.
And, you mentioned the parties. What's interesting is the fastest growing voting registration is actually independent, right?
Yes.
Which
should terrify
people,
both of them.
Even in Oklahoma, even though Republicans still remain dominant and all of that, independents tend to be more registered. Yep. New registrants tend to be independent than Republican or Democrat. And I think that also reflects kind of this dissatisfaction with what's going on.
You said the magic word yesterday. Where's the realignment?
I don't want to rain on your parade.
Oh, dear.
But I don't think you're ever going to get 18 to 25-year-olds to vote at the level that 70-year-olds do. I just don't think that's reasonable. And I think it's not because I think 18 to 25-year-olds are somehow inferior, but I just don't think they have the kind of incentives that older folks are going to have, right? And so that age group, many of them are still living at home with their parents. They're still going to school. They haven't started their career. They haven't been fully confronted with this thing called government in a real way that they see tangibly, right? We know they're impacted, right? Going through education, we're seeing a whole bunch of controversy about education in Oklahoma right now. So you and I know this stuff is impacting them. They don't feel that quite to the extent that they will when they're 25, 30 and such. And so I want to throw out some structural changes. Okay. These are radical, I know. And you're going to say, well, if it's not realistic to get 18 to 25-year-olds, it's not going to be realistic to do this. You're right. But we should at least broach the subject, right? I have agreed for a long time that the House of Representatives especially is not representative of the population as a whole, right?
Of course it's not.
But it's the one institution within our national government that is supposed to be.
Right.
It is supposed to be a mirror of all the wonderful, beautiful, and crazy and insane sanity that is in our population.
Sure.
That's what the House should be, is that, right? But it's not.
It is not, no.
And as long as we're in the framework that we're in, it's never going to be, right? So how do we get around that? I'm going to give 2 suggestions.
Okay.
All right.
I'm on the edge of my seat, listeners.
One, we need to enlarge the size of the House of Representatives and provide more opportunities for more voices.
How do you do that? Not based it on, how do you change the census?
There's nothing in the Constitution that sets the level of members of the House. So Congress can, by law, just say we're going to add X number of members.
I knew you knew the wonky answer. That's why I asked.
And the last time you want to guess when the last time they did that was?
Ooh, no.
After the 1910 census.
Wow.
So 1911, 1913 was when they set the number at 435.
My goodness.
And think about how much our country has changed over that time, right? Yeah. I think it's time to revisit that question and say, look, we need a body that is more reflective of our population.
I agree.
Right? The Senate was never designed to be that kind of representation. But it too could use a little bit more diversity in it, right? Now the structure it is set, right? 2 senators per state. But the other suggestion I have, term limits.
Yeah.
All right. The term limits will produce turnover. Now, I don't recommend like the term limits like we have in Oklahoma, which I think are too tight.
Tight, yeah.
But if you could set 20-year term limits on those,
I would be okay with 20.
Rotate some folks out, right? I think you start getting more voices and you start getting more, but that allows, that 20-year term limit allows for institutional knowledge to be passed
on and generational turnover.
That's right.
Right. Yeah, I think that's something that Mitt Romney is seeing. Sorry to take it back to right. Or were you done with your suggestions? I like them both.
Those are the 2 that I think would make the most difference in changing Congress and making it more reflective of the people they're supposed to be representing.
I mean, obviously, Congress is not representative if it took until 2021 for there to be more than 2 Native American representatives in the House. Come on.
And we have to, and I'm not one who is ever going to imagine that Congress will be perfectly mirror the demographics of the population. Right. But there's just so much that goes into running for Congress and who wants to go through that rigmarole, that kind of thing. But it can be more reflective, at least in what people actually want to see from their government. It can be more reflective in how people think the government should operate, these kinds of things. Yeah.
And I will push back just a little bit on you. I do think that this generation, not my generation, but the millennials, if you have been a listener for a while, you know how I feel about the millennial generation. We have kind of ceded a lot of our political power and been a little bit lazy and lackadaisical in some cases, I think. But the Gen Z, the plural generation, whatever you want to call these new kids, I really feel like, these kids are really with it. It's not showing in the voter turnout, obviously, but you're really seeing a lot of political participation in terms of demonstrations and marches and initiative petitions and use of social media, right? The hashtag activism really cannot be eschewed in American politics these days. These kids are really adept at getting their message out there. Whether or not it gets elected is a different story. So they're going to have to figure out how to turn that political mobilization into an actual turnout, into an actual, vote. Yeah. But these kids are pretty fired up.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I think much of the conflict that we see through the generations, through the parties, through all of this, evolves around a notion of mistaken understanding of what government is capable of doing.
Yes, and what it should be doing.
I think there is sometimes we expect the government to do more than it can. Yeah. And we need to evaluate that. And when I talk to my students, it's like, a lot of times they say, well, the government should do this. And I would say, okay, well, let's explore this. Why is the government the best entity within society to do this, right? Then which government? Because we don't just have one, right? So you might be right. The government should do this, but should it be the national government? Should it be the state government, or should it be the local government?
Yay, federalism.
Which is better suited to address the particular issue that you're concerned about, right? We don't ever have those conversations. It's just the government, and we all presume that must mean the national government. And so I think we need to all kind of step back and say, and we're never going to agree 100%, right? And some people are going to want the government to be more involved in economics. Some are going to take it stronger steps on climate. Some are going to want to do other things. We're never going to completely agree. But if we can all just take a step back and say, okay, let's look at this. Look, we're political scientists, so we think in these terms, right?
Right.
Why is government the best entity? Which level of government is most prepared and capable of doing this? Which government is going to be more accountable for if they mess it up, right? We talk about this all the time. Your ability to get a hold of your city council person, your ability to get a hold of your state legislator is far greater than your ability to reach your member of the House or Senate at the national level, right? And so that accountability thing, I think, is really strong too, of looking at who should be doing what. So, but in the meantime, Dr. Stacey is correct. The only way to fix this until they decide to expand the number in the House, or until it would take a constitutional amendment to get term limits. Till we get those is to vote. That's the only answer, to get out and vote, to support candidates that you think are speaking on issues that you care about. And if you can't find those candidates, make yourself the candidate.
It's got to happen. And, I try so hard, right, to light a fire under these kids and help them to understand, because I don't care what their partisan affiliation is. I care that they're part of their democracy, right? Because, as we've just discussed over the last 30 or so minutes, if these kids are not voting, if they are not out there actively participating in their democracy, then they are ceding their power to someone older than them, who is more established than they are, who has more money than them, whose kids are likely older than they are. So they don't care about tuition or net neutrality or the climate, etc. Nobody is going to do this for you but you. One of my favorite gems of, Dr. Stacey is going to be on my gravestone, I'm pretty sure, is the burden of a democracy is on you, right? If you want an easy government, go live in Russia. Putin's going to tell you he won the election with 95% of the vote before you get off the couch and go to the polls, right? This takes work. It's a republic if you can keep it, says Benjamin Franklin.
Democracy cannot be a spectator sport.
It is not.
Right? It is citizenship. Good citizenship requires active participation by the citizenry. And if you're going to say, look, I'm just not that interested, just understand that means you are, as Dr. Stacey said, you're ceding power. You're ceding decision-making authority to somebody else who may not agree with you on a whole host of things.
Who likely doesn't.
Right. Now, I do have one question. Let's bring this back to the presidential election of 2024, right? Who are young voters? Where are they at? Are they breaking hard for Biden? Are they not? Are they splitting relatively? I'm really interested in that question.
So again, going back to the NPR report, 24%, just 24%, say they definitely plan to vote for Biden. 20% say they likely support him. That is terrifying. A third of respondents say they are definitely or probably planning to vote for the eventual nominee. So it's pretty dead.
Interesting.
Yeah. Right. These kids are not excited at all.
They're not persuaded that these folks are who they want, right?
Not at all. No, these kids are not excited about either of these candidates. And, as we talked to our students yesterday at the town hall, I didn't see one hand go up when we asked, if Trump and Biden, who look like they're going to be the two, heir apparent nominees, clearly, no one raised their hands.
Here's right. Now, we talked about solutions for this at congressional level.
Sure.
What about at the presidential level? Well, here we go again. Another radical proposal. Let third-party candidates in on the presidential debates.
Okay.
When Biden and Trump have their debates, let the Green Party candidate, whoever that is, up there. Let the Libertarian Party candidate, whoever that is, up there. And I think the burden, if you want a criteria that says we're only going to let certain candidates on the stage, make that criteria be, is that candidate on the ballot in all 50 states? If they're on the ballot in all 50 states, they should be on the debate stage.
I'm okay with that.
And that's still going to weed out a lot of minor party candidates who simply aren't going to be on all 50 state ballots.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And if you're concerned that the candidate you like that's from a minor party is going to meet that, you need to get them on your state ballot, right? Get them up there. And that's unfortunately in many states, that's a tedious process.
It is.
Oklahoma was reduced, but it's still not easy, right? There's a reason we only have one third party on the ballot in the state.
Yeah. In terms of Gen Zers, the survey, 30% say they aligned with Democrats compared to 24% with Republicans, leaving 28% open for independence. That's probably 30% is a little high for Democrats. It's right. The survey was about 1,600. It's not.
Them, right?
No, it's absolutely not. So again, that pool of independence, it's becoming really important for us to hear more than just two voices. I completely agree with you. I am on the side of third and multi-parties. Don't make me get on a proportional representation soapbox. I will.
There would be another place we would actually agree, right?
But,
on things.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
But unfortunately, the only third-party candidate right now is Cornel West, who is, was backed by Bernie Sanders back in the day, right? Sanders was a supporter. I'm not quite sure where he stands right now. But Cornel West is having a lot of issues in the press lately with tax problems, all kinds of stuff. So, I mean, he's a wonderful academic, right? African-American scholar. Read his works, my friends. But in terms of a viable third-party candidate, he is certainly not.
That is the thing, right? Is how do we determine viability, right? And so much of that, if you're talking about running for Congress or running for U.S. Senate or even for your state legislature, viability mainly means, can I put the resources together to be competitive?
Exactly, right.
And that's just a real struggle for anybody who's not a Republican or Democrat, because you don't have that institutional support that you're going to have if you're with the major parties, right? At the presidential level, I think viability does rely on resources as well. But I just think make that debate commission change the criteria to being from getting a certain percentage of a number in the polls, which seems built-in advantage for Republicans and Democrats. Because if you don't know about them, how can you say you're for them, right? Instead of making that the criteria, make it, can they get on all 50 state ballots?
Yeah. Why can't the fourth estate just allow us to have more voices?
That's right. That's right.
I'm going to feed into your media nonsense today. Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. We have so much more diversity in our country in terms of the policy issues that we are, again, choosing the lesser of two evils, unfortunately. And
the reality is,
doesn't have to be
again,
that way.
If you go back and look at survey data, we're not as divided on a bunch of issues as our politics makes us believe we are, right? We are heavily divided in that Republicans and Democrats increasingly dislike each other.
Yes.
They don't like each other at all.
Polarization, absolutely.
Right? But if you start talking issues, there's a lot more agreement amongst the public. And somehow we've got to push through that and talk about that agreement and less about, oh, you're a Republican, I can't talk to you, or you're a Democrat, I don't want to have anything to do with you.
But again, I think the media environment absolutely feeds into that polarization, right? It's advantageous for the media, for the two political parties to continue this vicious cycle of, oh, I don't like you, I don't like your policy, we're not going to move on to anything, right? Your Congress doesn't do much.
It's interesting. Bill Bennett, who was a member of the Reagan and then the George H.W. Bush administrations, wrote a book during the President Clinton's scandal, the Lewinsky scandal. Small little book called The Death of Outrage. And he was very upset that nobody was concerned about all of these things going on. Now we're living in the politics of outrage, and all of our institutions are driving us to be mad at each other, right? It's not just the media or social media, but interest groups do the same thing. The political parties do the same thing. As you mentioned, the media, all of these major institutions are driving wedges between us. and clouding the fact that there's much more agreement on a lot of these issues than we think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wish I knew how to change that, but it is the fact that
tribalism is fun.
Yeah.
Right. Isn't it?
It gives us a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Right?
Purpose, identity. Yeah,
Purpose,
absolutely.
exactly right. And so it's a human tendency that is hard to overcome.
It is. And I would argue it's kind of a uniquely kind of American thing, right? We're very tribal about our football teams.
Oh, sure.
Or, you
right.
know,
and I think that's part of the problem is we treat our politics like we treat our sports,
absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And everything's about a competition and who's winning and who's losing, right? Well, the goal of politics ought to be that we all win,
Exactly.
you know?
Yes.
But it's not in today's environment, right? If one team wins, we automatically feel we're losing. Right. Trump made this, said, we're going to be winners. We're going to win so much we won't be able to stand the winning, right? And I'm like, what does that mean? But
tangibly, exactly, right?
But that's how we view politics today, and it's troubling. If you want to change it, I'm going to go back to what Dr. Stacey said: get involved. Right? Get involved. If you don't feel like you can run for office yourself, find somebody who can. Yep. Join an interest group that speaks to your issues and try to hold them accountable. Don't let them to make drive divisions, but to drive people to agreement, right? Exactly. These kinds of things. You've got to be involved if you want to change this. That's the real... that's the best way of accomplishing this.
And have those hard conversations, right? You can agree. I promise you can find compromise, right? If, Davenport and I can sit here as, a perhaps liberal millennial and a perhaps libertarian Gen Xer and find agreement on most things.
We can find
you
a
would
lot
be
of agreement.
surprised what you can do out there if you just talk to people about what they care about.
Right, and put down your preconceptions. Exactly. Just let people talk and listen. And then, and as you're listening, don't listen to try, I'm going to counter that point. I'm going to counter. Exactly. Listen to what they're saying and find out what's important to them. And then you can communicate in a way that effectively finds those bridges, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I think we've covered this to the extent we can today.
Absolutely.
We will be back, no doubt. There's never going to be a shortage of things to talk about. That's for sure. And we've got more stuff going on. We'll be talking about stuff happening in Oklahoma. Yeah. We'll be talking about stuff nationally. We'll even be talking about international stuff.
Probably bringing some friends.
The president of Ukraine was in the country this week.
The UN Assembly, General Assembly, yes.
And so lots going on in the world.
Tons.
And you need to know about it, and you need to take action on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Be involved. This is what it's about.
Fantastic. I'm James Davenport. This has been Dr. Emily Stacey. We are so glad to be back, and we will see you next time on
Not My Generation.
And if you want to reach out to us and propose topics to be discussed, make comments, suggestions, how can they reach us?
At notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
We'll see you next time.
Bye. We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.